Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're so glad that we have you with us. We want to talk with you today about unlocking traceability, how we and you can make the most of your automatic tests. We want to look in with you during the next 45 minutes that we will spend together about significant effort that go into the automatic testing and how we can make those test reports, that traceability reports, better, easier, and less of a pain for everybody involved in the process. We want to take you down the DevOps pipeline and take it one step further. For that, who I have with me today is, on the one hand, ladies first, our CEO from RadBee, Rina Nir. Rina is, as I mentioned, the CEO of RadBee, who's also an Atlassian solution partner, and she's the product manager of Jira Snapshots. She helps teams harness the power of Atlassian to help you ace your audits, reduce the waste, eliminate redundancies, lower overhead, and just generally boost the bottom line. And we're here together with Ben. Ben is the automation genius of our partner, Swarmit. He's based in Zurich, Switzerland, and he works with teams who really want to take their test automation to the next level. And he helps clients with system integration, test automation, and process automation, which makes him the perfect partner to go through whatever we have in our system and in the back for you today. And I'm really looking forward to what Rina and Ben will talk about. I hope you're having just as great a time as we do. A quick note before we start: feel free to put any information you want or any questions that you have in the chats. We will bring them in the conversation throughout the whole talk, and we hope we have everything answered when you leave us at the end. Having said that, I will hand over to Rina, who will tell us a bit more about snapshots and what we can do with that and how all of that integrates to what we do. Rina, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Saskia, and hi, everybody who has joined us. It's so nice to have you here. Tests and test automation is always a big effort, but especially with enterprises who go with the very modern trends of agile and digital transformation. And hey, who doesn't want to do digital transformation and become more agile today? But as an enterprise, when you go that route, you find yourself investing more in tests and test automation, because with all these things going very quickly, releasing so often, you still want to have control that whatever you release is what you expected to release. So to achieve that, actually, we have to mention one other component to that collection of buzzwords, and this is DevOps. And DevOps really, for enterprises, helps bring the promise of Agile to production, basically. Because with all the concepts that DevOps bring, which is more automation, more sophisticated pipeline, better collaboration across teams, these are very important concepts that really help larger teams to deliver quality in a very consistent manner. And basically, what are we all trying to achieve with those new processes and all the tooling? We have this vision that our team will have this flow. Each person in the team, whether they are a developer, a product manager, even a user, and definitely the testers, each one of them will know exactly what they need to do and how they contribute to the bigger picture. And somehow they will all converge together to the same point of time where we can release and have this moment of epiphany. Yes, we have worked so hard to deliver the next release. We arrive to that point, we release it, and everything goes very well afterwards. The users are happy with whatever we delivered. Now, to achieve that, what we find is that very often with all the tooling and automation, instead of creating one big flow, we create chunks flow, if I may say it like that. So we have the DevOps pipeline where development and testers write code and automatic test. Then there's this is all being committed and pushed to the repository. It's then being built, deployed, tested, and we even have some test reports maybe going out of this pipeline. But as we all know, automatic tests are not everything and not covering everything that we need. So we always have something in way of a manual test. And sometimes it's very limited and sometimes it's much more significant. So we have done all the automation. We still have people writing and performing manual tests. And they maybe are working with Xray and putting all the results there. And we somehow at the end need to create those reports because as an enterprise, we have to have some kind of test report that will hold everybody accountable to whatever is released. And if we are not planning correctly, this effort of reporting can become a very significant effort and really be a burden to the team, such a burden that from this beautiful flow that we all wanted to achieve, we have this different flow where we basically all finish the work and then a bunch of us are still busy with creating all the documentation that needs to go with the release. And only then, after some delay, which can be pretty significant, we are able to release. So where's the flow and where's the advantage of all the tooling if we are stuck with that? So what we want to do or what we want to have is a test flow that takes into account all the reports that we need to provide, even if we work on business critical projects, those projects that require all those traceabilities and test reports. So how to achieve that? Basically, what we need is to extend our pipeline. So we have done the CI/CD, we have the test reports. These test reports then need to automatically be integrated or be imported into the same platform where we do our manual tests. And once we have all the results together, and in our case, it's in Jira and in Xray, we can then get all the reports very easily in Confluence. And basically, between me and Ben, we'll cover that part today. Ben will show us how to bring the information from the automatic test into Jira and Xray, and I will give you a taste of how then all the reports can be generated automatically. And the tools we'll be using is Xray and Jira software as the foundation of where you collect eventually all the data about the tests, and Confluence and Jira Snapshots, which is the platform we are going to use in order to generate the test reports. And before I allow Ben to jump into the more techy part that requires really scripting and integration between various tools, I want to give you a very quick glance into how the reports will look like after we have done this effort. And these reports are in Confluence. And this is Confluence. And this is an example of a test report that is generated once we have all the test information, both manual and automatic tests inside Jira. This is basically a Confluence page that has on it a table which is a Jira snapshot table. The Jira snapshot table has static data. It's not dynamic. It doesn't show the data that Jira has now, but reflects the data in Jira at a certain point of time. So we have full control about that. We don't risk the fact that things in Jira change and the report suddenly will be changed. And we have full control on the different columns that appear here and what tests and what test executions are being shown. And we basically can build all the various reports that we need in our reporting for the release documentation, we can build them with different snapshots because the hierarchy, the selection of issues, and the relationship between the issues is totally configured per table. So, for example, I will show the full traceability report here, which takes us all the way from the epics on the left to the stories, to the test, and to the test runs, and displays the interesting columns, the ones that we were interested to show for each of these topics, for each of these issues. So, and to be able to generate these reports, the key here is to actually have the data inside Confluence. Inside Jira, and from Jira, this data arrives to Confluence. Can you show the next slide, Saskia? Thank you. So, as we already mentioned, the key toolset that we have or we are using is Jira and Confluence, Jira Snapshots, and Xray. But in order to create the integration with the test automation, you need to go into the CI/CD toolchain, and Ben, in his talk, will mention a very specific use case where he uses GitLab, JUnit, and the Roboto framework. And these, of course, are just examples. You can use other tools as well using the same principles. So I'm very happy at this point to hand over to Ben. Ben, take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Rina. As Rina already mentioned, I would like to show you an actual integration of Xray into GitLab with basically actually most test automation tools that exist, as long as they kind of produce the results that are needed, right? So this will be kind of three parts, as we can see here. So the first part we will look at is actually the Xray configuration. So how do we set up the Xray tests that they can be integrated with GitLab and the test automation tools. And then we also will have a look at the rather new feature, the Xray remote job trigger, which is a possibility to trigger the actual test executions directly out of Xray. Then in the second part, we will have a look at GitLab, where we see how the configuration of GitLab looks like and how it will then run the tests. And in the third part, then also how it can import the results into Xray, back into Xray. So let's have a first look at the automatic tests. So how do you actually map those to Xray tests? So you have your test cases in your test automation tools, and you want to map them with Xray test cases. So there are actually two ways for that. The first one would be to actually let Xray do all the work. So you could just like import the results of your tests, automatic tests, and then Xray basically creates everything for you. It will create the Xray tests and the test execution. But of course, you're not starting from zero. So normally you already have some test cases already in Xray. For this, you can then manually, or let's say one time manually, define which Xray test case should be mapped to which automated test. So let's have a look at this. So if you see here on this screen, you will see on the top, you will see a part of a JUnit test result. And you see, I already marked the important parts, which is the name and the class name. So this is the information that you need to transfer into your Xray test cases. And if you then go look below, you will see an Xray test case that is in edit mode, where we went to the test details. And there we need to set up the test detail to generic. Maybe it was before manual because you had it as a manual test case. You can then basically switch to generic, which kind of represents a automated test. And then the second part is that you set up the generic test definition, and maybe you already see it. It's a combination out of the class name with a dot at the end and the test case name. And this kind of gives you the mapping from test case in the JUnit world with the test case in Xray. Okay, so now that we had a look at this, let's see how that Xray remote job trigger looks like. So as I said, you can then remotely, or let's say out of Xray, trigger the jobs in GitLab. To do this, you have to have certain things. So you need to have credentials so that you can run from Xray the GitLab pipeline. So one part would be to have a personal or project access token. These are either in the project settings on the access token, or in your own profile, or in the profile of the user that you're using in GitLab. There, it's important that you set up the API as a granted right for this token, and then you're all set on this part. Then the second part is that you also need a pipeline trigger token. This one can be found also within GitLab in the project settings on the CI/CD. It's another API token that you basically need. When you have these two things, you also need the project ID and the branch you would run the tests on, and you can go over and configure that in Xray. In Xray, you have under your project settings, you have the possibility to use to create remote job triggers, as you can see here. And there's one specifically for GitLab, actually. So this is an Xray enterprise feature. So you will only see that if you have this version of Xray. Okay, I will maybe show later in the demo how this in more detail looks like. When you created this setup, this integration, you will have, in the test plan or in the test execution, actually in both of them, a new drop down called trigger build, where you can then trigger out of your test execution or test plan the actual test run over to GitLab. Okay. So then the second part would be here. What does it look like in GitLab and how is it configured? So the configuration in GitLab that will be then run is actually in a so-called file called gitlab-ci.yaml, which contains basically all the steps that will be run when you run the pipeline. So it basically here, it will kind of create a runner that uses a certain image. And if you look more in detail, I set up two jobs in here. One is for a JUnit test and one is for a robots framework test. They actually don't contain the trigger of calling or running the test cases, but only for demo purpose, I just put in the results call. So this will be a curl call, as you can see here. So it will then trigger the calls back to Xray. And the results files that we will send back to Xray, they will look like this. So this is a JUnit example, which contains here, in this case, 4 test cases and some more additional information. As basically, you can say any kind of test automation tool that supports creating JUnit results files can be used to integrate with Xray and also with GitLab to upload and send all the reports back basically. So for example, also one of my favorite tools is Traceability Tosca, also supports this in its CI/CD pipeline tools to kind of create these JUnit files. Good. Then we have when you call back from GitLab to Xray, of course, GitLab also needs the right to access Xray. And for this, you basically either need a personal access token, which you can create in Jira under your profile, or the username password of the user that you would want to use for this. Okay, good. Then we have here just the example of a curl that I was talking about before. So this is what GitLab then calls to return the results. It will add things like the JUnit example XML, so the file that contains the results. You will have to add the access token in there and also the project key. Now there's more parameters as you can see below. Below we have like things like test execution key. So if you don't define a test execution key, you will so Xray actually will create its own test execution. If you define one, it will just add the results into that existing test execution. Okay, and then when it's ran, then everything should be back inside inside Xray. So I hope I could explain this more or less clear to you, and I would like to do a demo now for that. Good, thank you. So here you see our demo environment from Swarmit. We have created a project for this, and as you can see, we already have a lot of data in there, so a lot of issues in there. For one, I created here a test execution for for this demo, as well as a lot of test cases here. So let's first have a look at the test case. So what I was talking about before, the whole mapping thing. If you edit one of these test cases, so I've took this automatic test 3 here. If you open it up here, you will see here that there are test details, and inside here you will get all the information I was talking about. So the test type should be generic, and there should be a generic test definition mapped to the JUnit information that we were talking about before. Okay, I will close this again. Then we were talking about all the tokens, right? So one token would be in here in GitLab. In GitLab, you will see the tokens either on your profile, which you can edit here, or here on the project. Oops. On the project, you have here the settings and the access token. That's the project access token. And the other token I was talking about is here on the CI/CD under pipeline trigger tokens, which you can also then just create in here. Okay. Then when we go back to Xray, we need to set up that remote job trigger I was talking about. This is under the project settings. So here's the project settings, and on the remote job trigger down here at the Xray settings. As you can see here, we have several tools that you can actually use to integrate Xray. I already created some here, actually 2 for GitLab. Let's have a short look into the details here. You will see here we have the configuration name, branch name, the API token, which is the trigger token we were talking about, and also the authentication token, which is the project access token. Okay, when you've set up all of this, then you will have in your issue, as I already mentioned, in your test execution, this trigger build listed here. The same is also on the test plan here, where you also have this trigger build. Now, before I trigger this, just have a short look what will happen in GitLab. So if I would trigger this one, in GitLab, we would see under the configuration, the setup of my GitLab YAML file that I was talking about. So we would run the JUnit test job and the robot test job, as mentioned before. I will put this also on the pipeline, so we will see live what will happen there. So let me trigger this one here. So as you can see, everything is in to-do at the moment, and then we will run it from here. Xray will return you a success message, and then when we go back here, you can already see that something is running. You can go more into details in here, and you will see that already actually the JUnit and robot test jobs have been done, and my deploy job that I just defined as one, is also just started and is finished now. Inside of these, you can then see more the details. So what I defined before, it will call the Xray REST API to upload then the information. Okay, okay, let's have a look back. What happened in Xray? So I will now refresh the page. And then we will see that the test cases actually got updated and we have the results from GitLab coming back here. Inside the test cases, also, by the way, the robot results that I defined before also got results. You can then have a look at the details. So depending on what you have inside of your test results, you can go even deep into every test step that happened. For example, if it was a UI test case that you ran. Exactly, let's go back. You can even, just as an example, integrate screenshots. So that's screenshots of my last blog. Good, yeah. If you're interested in that. And yeah, then I think I'm done with the demo so far.
Thanks. I really like that you added in your demo the screenshot, because it really, I think, brings home for people the fact that the integration is not necessarily a superficial integration. It can be as deep and detailed and specific as you need it to be, and really bring all the data that you need to bring into Xray into one place where you have both your manual tests and your automatic tests under one roof, and you can then build whatever reports that you need to build out of them. So
Yes,
that's
great.
very cool. And this is basically this blue arrow that we were shown by Ben. Now that we have all this data and the test results inside Xray, the next step would be basically to create our reports. And this is basically Confluence, where our report is basically ready, but it's ready from before the demo that Ben just gave, and we'll run a new snapshot. So now what happens is basically based on the same configuration and the same definition, something goes to the background, fetches the results, the new results, and brings them here. And I think these two results are actually results from now, the new additions that were happening from the demo. I can compare this data to the previous data, and I see that things have been updated. Let's look a little bit behind the scene and see how the report is. This report is being configured. And just to impress you a bit, I will go into the 4-level traceability reports, and we'll edit the screen, the page. So basically the whole table is brought into Confluence via a single macro, Jira Snapshots. And when we open this macro, we see that there is a definition of the data that this table should contain. And because it's a traceability report, and in our traceability, it's epics going to stories, going to test and test runs, we have 4 levels. Each one of them was added here under the other. And for each level, we basically have a JQL search that is a native Jira JQL. You all may be familiar with this just from doing searches inside Jira. And for each level, we have whatever fields that we decided to bring. And in this case, we decided to bring the issue type, the key, and the summary. We can bring description and whatever other key fields, including custom fields that exist in your Jira. The second level and the subsequent level have a JQL that is slightly more sophisticated because it contains dollar something. And in this case, it's epic link equals dollar key, which is basically generating the hierarchy. So the hierarchy that traceability snapshots may express are any hierarchy and any relationship that is valid in Jira. It's not necessarily only the epic story and so on. You can create, for example, user requirements leading up to tests and so on, whatever is the terminology that works for you and the hierarchy that you build in your Jira. And the last level here is a test run level. And interestingly, test runs are not a Jira issue, but because Snapshots has such a deep integration with Xray, it can be configured to bring whatever fields exist in test runs into Snapshots. And these are internal fields that only Xray knows, but Snapshots, through the integration with Xray, can present them in the snapshot table. So that's basically how you configure snapshots. And with this full flexibility, you can define how many different reports you need to define for your release documentation. You define them upfront, and just in the last minute when you are ready to release, you can take the snapshot with the fresh data, and you can then share it with a stakeholder, export it as PDF, get it approved, whatever you need to do with the reports. We can now move back to the presentation. So after all that effort of integrating with your DevOps pipeline, Xray, and then the last mile being achieved with Confluence and Jira Snapshots for Confluence, we move from this sad state of affairs where we have invested huge amount of efforts but still are stuck with our reports at the end of the release. We move to the next place where basically our reports are gradually built with a lot of ease during the work. And when everybody converges to the moment that we can release, all the reports are basically ready. Everything is set to go, and we can really release without any delay. So yes, that's basically all our cycle today. That's the story, and I'm handing back to Saskia. And to you, basically, for Q&A. Saskia, you are on mute.
Thank you very much for that very detailed insight and all the practical demonstration of what was happening. I have to admit, even I was kind of surprised how well that fit together. And I work with RadBee, so it was very practical. Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to pick up some of the questions that we had in the comments. And Ben, I'd like to start with a question for you that is more of a practical one. You showed us your whole setup based on the GitLab pipeline, and we had the question if the whole setup that you showed us would also work with the Bitbucket pipeline. So does that work? And if so, how does that work? Do you know how that would change the process that you just showed us?
I think for the remote job trigger, I'm not sure if it's supported. I would have to look that up. But basically, what is required, of course, is just that you have a kind of a REST API, which Bitbucket should have or has actually, and then you can certainly integrate that with GitLab for sure. And also on Jira side, if the remote job trigger does not work, you still have the possibility to use automations for Jira, which is also a way that you can trigger things with a webhook or something like that. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Rina, handing over to you. So we have that whole setup and we have all our tests run. We have the question if we can show a table of test executions with the summary of its test outcome. For example, how many % passed, how many failed. The person asking the question was giving the example of how Xray for Servers does that. Is there a functionality like that? Can we show it right away? Is there an option?
So this functionality is actually a functionality of Xray. Jira Snapshots does not support specifically this report. We cannot, at the moment, but it's a continuously moving product. But at the moment, we cannot show the summary report of the test execution progress. This is actually provided by Xray.
Okay, which actually leads me over to another set of questions, also one that I have actually. I joined the Q&A saying like, wow, I'm really impressed how well that works together and how well that works. But we also know every system has kind of its limitations, right? So picking up one of the questions, does Xray still scale if you report several thousand test cases each day? How would that work in the system?
Yeah.
Ben, do you want to take it? Or I can have a first stab of it if you allow me.
Yeah, sure.
Sure, and then you can add your point.
Yeah.
I think I would not, meaning even if Xray can scale, and it's, I would say that it's more a question of Jira than Xray in the case, especially in the case of data center, that is the platform that we just showed. I would not do that. So the fact that you can do something like that is maybe not the best practice to do that. What I would recommend is that you will do the linkage when you need it. So you typically are not in a situation that you need to actually inject thousands of results few times every day, unless you are really in a place where you release few times a day. I don't know a lot of banks or insurance companies that necessarily release few times a day, but if you do, then for each release, I would do an import. What I want to say, if you just do a cycle, a CI/CD cycle that is more part of your release, not release, part of your development work and not triggering a release, I would not necessarily import that. I would import all these tests for things that really contribute to your release documentation. That's my thinking, and that's how I would try to manage it. But I'm sure Ben has more to add here.
Yes, well, I can give my 2 cents to that. So I also think like you always have to think about how much data you transfer in the end, right? So the thing I did with like adding screenshots, I would then maybe not do in this kind of situation, just to kind of size down the data limits, right? There are possibilities. So normally, actually, you also have like the enterprise versions, which works on data center, which requires you to have a kind of a powerful setup in the end, right? So I think from that point of view, you should be kind of safe. But still, as Rina said, maybe it's not the best idea to do that every day, especially if that the data then collects in the Xray databases and can get bigger and bigger, which could in the end pose a problem. Yeah.
And I think that all these tools of the DevOps pipeline, and Ben would know it even better than me, allow you to have either flags or configurations that allow you to say, okay, I run the pipeline and I do the last step of import, or I run it and I do not do the import.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always a question of how much information do you actually need, right? You don't need this information every minute, right? So maybe just run them at a time that makes sense in the end. Right?
Picking up on that, you just said, how much information do you need? Which brings up a question for me. How much automation do you need? We were talking about the whole system being completely automated. When would you say it makes sense to put in the effort to set everything up to automate the system? And when might it be more of a nice shiny toy than actually bringing value?
Good question. So I think what you should keep in mind when you automate something, that these are processes, automation that always should run the same way, right? So when you look out of a testing perspective, if you set up a new release with new features, there are things that haven't been automated yet, right? So you have to look at this from a more of a exploratory way, maybe. So that's where kind of manual testing comes in. And other things that happen often in the same way, those are things that you want to automate, basically. Yes.
My 2 cents here is that you need to have the justification from the point of view of economy of scale to show that it actually saves an effort, because in some situations it may be that manually bringing back all these reports together makes sense. But from my experience, this is only valid in rather small organizations. And once you start investing big time in test automations, if you are in a position that you need to generate release documentation, it's almost a no-brainer, because actually the integration, if you compare it to the big effort of automatic tests and maintaining automatic tests, which is an expensive effort, yes, this extra wiring or pipelining to bring it all together is a very small effort compared to the big effort of making all these automatic tests.
Mostly when we're talking about Jira, we're talking about two different systems here. We're talking about the data center and we're talking more and more about cloud. How does the system you just showed us, also in integration with each other, Xray, Jira, and GitLab, Ben, what you did, how does that maybe even differ between the two systems? Is there a preference of you where it works best, and how would you set it up?
So if it's in the cloud, basically, it kind of works the same way. You will have, I'm not sure if the enterprise version exists on cloud.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
It is released on cloud. It is released. It was released later than data center, but it's available now.
Okay. Then makes sense. So then basically it should be the same thing, right? Because you have REST APIs in between everything, and also the setup of the remote job trigger should then be existent. And you have GitLab, which can also be in the cloud, right? So GitLab as a free tool, you can install it on premise, or you can use it in the cloud for free. It's open to that, so would basically be the same setup then.
Yes, and if I may mention, if someone is interested, we had a webinar a couple of months ago, which was pretty similar to this one in terms of content, but the demo was on a slightly different tool set, but on cloud. So it's shows similar ideas, but with the demos on clouds and a totally cloud implementation.
Yes.
Wow, that was a lot of information. We're heading towards the end of our time together. Anything from your side that hasn't been mentioned yet that you want to say, that you want to share, that you think is still worth mentioning? Ben?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to do this with you. I would say if you need any more information, just look me up. I can also give you more information on any kind of small parts that I didn't cover up to now.
Brilliant. And you should definitely take Ben on his word here. He's someone worth picking up. And yes, so I think it's important to mention that what the concepts that we showed are available both on data center and on cloud with some variation. Now, I know that especially the DevOps cycle looks always to be very, very geeky and special, etc. But the nice thing about it is that once you set it up, it kind of works for you for free. So that's the payoff from that.
Okay, I think that's a wrap, right? Perfect last words, so to speak. Ben, thank you very much for being here, for agreeing to share your knowledge with us, for sharing your insights, for sharing your setup with everybody. If you still have questions, please continue to use the comment function in LinkedIn. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, we will still be able to follow those up. Otherwise, I invite you again to take Ben up on his offer to contact him directly. And also, if you have questions about Jira Snapshots, feel free to contact Rina and I. Having said that, we wish you a great rest of the morning, day, night, wherever you're joining us from. And we hope to see you in our next webinar with the next partner, which will be coming soon. Just a little spoiler. Yeah. So thank you very much, Rina. Thank you very much, Ben. And thank you very much for
Thank you.
for us. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.